Hello, everyone. My name is Frank Finley. I'm the Executive Director of the Marketing Accountability Standards Board, and we want to welcome you to our Making Marketing Accountable webinar series, episode number 13. We have a wonderful presentation with us here today. We'll be having Art Klein, who's the partner and CEO of MSW Research, and he'll be talking about their measuring advertising effectiveness with MSW's Creative Gauge AI. That is their AI system used to review copy of various materials, which he'll go into more details. But one thing that was really exciting when we were first talking to Art about potentially doing this webinar is how closely the outcomes that they were seeing in training their AI and putting together the analytics for that system was how closely they aligned with the outcomes of our measuring creativity project. So that will be going into more detail. At this time, I'd like to welcome Art. Art Klein is the partner and CEO of MSW Research. He has been with the company for 31 years. Uh, if you don't know MSW Research, which I would find unusual, but if you don't, it is one of the oldest independent market research firms in the world. It was established in 1968, and they are especially well known for inventing the brand preference metric and numerous other innovations in copy testing, brand tracking, and media optimization. So at this time, I'm going to hand the presentation over to Art.
Thank you, Frank. Well, thank you, MASB, for inviting me to this webinar, and thanks for the introduction, Frank. Let's get right into it. Let me start with something that most of us in marketing recognize immediately. Creativity is celebrated. Our industry gives awards for it. We rank ads based on entertainment value. We talk about how funny, emotional, or memorable an ad was. In fact, knowledge of advertising is a critical point of cultural literacy in our society. But when businesses evaluate their marketing investments, the conversation becomes very different. The CEO and CFO are not asking whether the ad was clever or entertaining, or if it won any awards. They're asking very straightforward questions. Did the advertising increase sales? Did it increase market share? Did it improve pricing power or brand value? So there's a tension that exists in marketing. On one side, we celebrate creativity. On the other side, business demands effectiveness. And that tension is really the starting point for the MASB work and for the conversation we're going to have today. The MASB Measuring Creativity Project set out to answer a deceptively simple question. What actually makes advertising creative? And what makes it effective? To do that, MASB reviewed a very large body of research across marketing, advertising, psychology, communications. That project examined decades of work, looking at how creativity influences consumer response and ultimately financial performance. From that review, they developed a set of definitions. In other words, they tried to move the conversation away from awards and opinions and toward evidence-based evaluation of creative effectiveness. That framework provides a very useful lens for understanding how advertising works. The MASB work put forth definitions of creativity, originality, and effectiveness. They define creativity as the production of something original that serves a useful purpose, that purpose being effectiveness. They define originality as something new, novel, or divergent from the past, and that it's a key component of creativity. They define effectiveness as advertising's ability to achieve increasing sales volume, market share, or margins. And both originality and effectiveness are required for something to be creative. Maybe the most important thing to remember is that effectiveness is a critical component of creativity, particularly in terms of achieving financial outcomes. Now, I agree with all those definitions, but I would frame it up a little bit differently, and I would demonstrate it in this way. One of the most important distinctions in the literature is that creativity, and by that I mean the originality component of it, is not the same thing as effectiveness. People often assume that if an ad is original, it must be effective. This goes back to the awards, but that's simply not the case. This four-cell matrix summarizes the possible outcomes of an ad in terms of the components of creativity, those being originality and effectiveness. Unfortunately, lots of ads fall into quadrant one. They're not original or effective in moving the sales needle. Cells 2 and 3 are interesting. Ads in cell 2 manage to be effective without being particularly original. This may be the case where a clearly presented value proposition gets the job done with a relatively plain presentation. This might be the case where a functional benefit is compelling enough that it effectively sells itself. Cell 3 contains ads that are probably highly likable, but this originality isn't harnessed on behalf of the brand. So ultimately, these ads fail to meet business objectives. Cell 4 would be what MASB would call truly creative. This is where the magic happens. Focused originality in support of a meaningful value proposition. This substantially increases sales for the brand. And it's what we call the Holy Grail. Understanding these distinctions is critical because it shifts the conversation from simply asking, is this ad creative, to asking, does this ad work? The MASB framework also emphasizes something that is fundamental, but it's often overlooked. Advertising effectiveness ultimately needs to be defined in terms of business impact. Advertising itself does not produce financial outcomes directly. Instead, advertising influences consumer perceptions and behaviors. Consumers then respond to the advertising. Those responses are purchasing decisions. And purchasing decisions ultimately translate into market outcomes like market share, revenue, and margin. The things that CEO and CFO are most concerned about. So the chain looks like this. Advertising investment influences consumer behavior. Consumer behavior drives financial outcomes. That linkage between marketing actions and financial performance is the foundation of marketing accountability. One of the most consistent findings in advertising research is that the quality of the creative message plays a huge role in determining the effectiveness of the advertising. Media investment determines how many people see the message, but the creative quality determines what happens when they see it. If the creative message is weak, increasing media spend produces diminishing returns. You can buy awareness. Let me say that again. You can buy awareness. You can pump a lot of money behind mediocre advertising and gain awareness. You can't buy effectiveness. But if the creative quality is strong, every dollar of media becomes more effective. In that sense, creative quality acts as a multiplier of media investment. That's why improving creative quality can dramatically improve the ROI of advertising without increasing the budget. In fact, creative quality is 4 times more important than media spend alone. Brands that place an overdominance on performance metrics and only spend research dollars focused on optimizing media spend do that to the detriment of the brand. Instead, brands should optimize creative quality and benefit from 4x lift and long-term brand equity building that will last. Optimizing performance metrics is a mechanical spend. It'll fade quickly without continued spend, while optimizing creative quality is an investment in the brand that has lasting effects. This leads to an important point. Originality is not the goal. Originality is a tool. It is a tool to achieve creativity. Originality is where people can go off track. The goal of advertising is to influence consumer behavior in ways that benefit the business. Originality can help achieve the goal. It can attract attention. It can make messages more memorable. It can help communicate ideas in compelling ways. But originality only has value to the extent that it contributes to the business outcome. In other words, originality is a means to an end, not an end itself. The MASB paper talks about the importance of a value proposition. Other people and companies call it many things: a unique selling proposition, a big idea, a brand promise, a value delivery system. In MSW parlance, we call it brand differentiation. And although there are many names, the underlying theme is the same: that a value proposition is the part of the advertising message that communicates the product's benefits, the value it provides, and how it differs from the competition. And its purpose is to persuade consumers to choose that product or service over competitive offerings. It's the foundation for effective advertising. And we have found that it is indisputably one of the strongest and most consistent predictors of advertising effectiveness. Now, originality also plays an important role. Original executions can amplify the impact of a value proposition. Humor, storytelling, music, visual imagery, all of these can help to make a message more engaging and memorable. But on the other hand, originality can also obscure the message. It can dominate the ad and fail to reinforce the value proposition. The audience may remember the ad but forget the brand or message. So effective advertising requires both a strong message and originality that supports that message. This brings us to a common problem in the measurement of advertising effectiveness. Many measurement systems focus on the things that are easy to measure. For example, award-winning ads are often used as proxies for creative effectiveness. But awards reflect a panel of judges, not actual consumer behavior or sales. Attention metrics, like recall, are used as measures of effectiveness. While we all know many examples of high recall ads that produce little or no return. Soft measures, like liking in the USA Today Super Bowl ad meter poll, are not measures of effectiveness. Like other diagnostic metrics, liking tends to measure just originality, but not the strength of the value proposition and how well the originality amplifies or obscures that message. And ultimately, these types of measures have weak linkages to financial outcomes. Effectiveness ultimately depends on whether the advertising influences consumer choice and business performance. So one of the challenges in this area is distinguishing between diagnostic measures and metrics that reveal an ad's true effectiveness. At MSW, we've been doing this a long time, and over the years have approached this topic through empirical research. For decades, we've been studying the relationship between advertising content and consumer response. We've examined how specific elements of creative content influence breakthrough, brand preference, and persuasion. Over time, that work has produced a large body of data and a set of models linking creative elements to marketplace outcomes. So while MASB approached the problem through a literature review, we have been following an empirical and data-driven path over the course of decades. And that data has produced models built on a very large foundation of research, more than 50 years of data, hundreds of thousands of advertising executions, tens of millions of survey responses, and detailed coding of more than 150 creative content elements. Each ad in the database has been analyzed for presence, absence, and prominence of specific creative elements. That structure allows us to examine each element's contribution to breakthrough, brand preference, and persuasion, and how these creative elements influence consumer response. What's interesting is that the MASB work and our own research arrived at very similar conclusions, although through very different paths. MASB synthesized the academic and industry literature. MSW developed content-based models from decades of testing and research. Both perspectives converged on the same fundamental idea. Creative effectiveness is not just about originality. It's about how advertising content channels originality to influence consumer response and ultimately financial outcomes. That's the same truth. And there are striking parallels between the MASB dimensions of measuring creativity and the content-based dimensions MSW has developed. MASB suggests 3 dimensions to measuring creativity, and each of these parallel an MSW dimension. MASB and MSW both highlight the importance of emotion, which typically result of originality. Both acknowledge that message matters, and both agree on the need for the brand to stand out and be properly attributed. MSW has also identified a 4th key dimension called ad structure. That helps to channel originality in a consumer motivating manner through things like demonstrations and formats and characters. One of the biggest challenges marketers face today is a gap in testing. Most creative is never tested. Why? There are several reasons. Brands now produce hundreds or even thousands of creative assets across channels. Second, marketers need feedback much faster than traditional research can provide. And third, there's been an increasing reliance on performance metrics like clicks and engagement as proxies for effectiveness. Those metrics are useful, but they don't necessarily tell us whether the creative message is persuasive or whether it will drive short-term or long-term brand growth. How can AI contribute in this space? Well, this is where AI begins to play a role. AI can help scale the evaluation of creative content. Instead of testing a small number of ads with traditional research, AI can analyze large numbers of creative assets. It can do it quickly, meeting the needs for immediate insights, also reducing the overdependence on performance metrics. That allows marketers to close the creative gap and incorporate creative evaluation throughout the development process rather than only at the end. So far, we've been talking about the principles behind creative effectiveness, the role of originality, the importance of the value proposition, and the link between advertising content and financial outcomes. But that raises a very practical question for marketers. If we know creative content matters so much, how do we actually measure it? Historically, as an industry, the way we've answered that question is through advertising research, essentially copy testing. Obviously, there are lots of companies that offer this service and a lot of different methodologies. And copy testing is a core piece of our business at MSW. And there's a place for that. So what I'm about to say is not a knock on traditional copy test-based survey research. It's an alternative approach that opens up a world of opportunities. Most traditional methods of advertising research have two important limitations. First, they're relatively slow and expensive. Second, they can only evaluate a small number of ads compared to the enormous amount of ads that brands produce today. And that's mostly because of budgetary constraints or timing constraints. The gap, what we know about the effective advertising, is our ability to apply that at scale. It's what led us to develop Creative Gauge. Creative Gauge is essentially a way of taking decades of research about what makes advertising effective and scaling it using artificial intelligence. So marketers can evaluate far more creative far earlier in the development process and do it affordably. Now, there's been a lot of talk about synthetic sample and personas, so that when we say our tool is AI, that's what people automatically think. So right out of the gate, it's very important for me to point out that's not what we're doing. We don't fake consumers in any way. What we do is operationalize 50 years of validated advertising research. Creative Gauge does not generate synthetic respondents, virtual personas, or artificial survey data. It applies AI to systematically identify and evaluate the proven drivers of sales effectiveness inside the creative itself. Our models are built and trained on MSW's historical database of advertising research, in-market, sales-validated outcomes. AI is used to detect, score, and interpret the presence, absence, and prominence of the creative elements that have been empirically linked to breakthrough, brand preference, and sales in market. So we don't replace human data at all. We scale it. Let's talk about model training. Most companies say their model is trained on such and such or whatever they claim. But most people don't ask how or on what data. This is what we do, and it's all about statistical learning. We use our historical database of ads, coded on content elements, survey results, validated sales performance outcomes, to build and quantify the relationship between 150 specific creative content elements and breakthrough, brand preference, and sales in market. The AI, which we've named Meadow, learns which elements matter and how much they matter. This is math. It's modeling. It's empirical, and it's based on our data. Well, let's talk about the harder part, but it's the part that most people would be more familiar with because it's how they interact with AI tools on a daily basis. And that's the prompts. There are simple prompts like you'd use in ChatGPT, Claude, or Gemini. A simple prompt is conversational, the type of prompt everyone has used. Plan a trip for me, write a better email, summarize this article, and it works. It's impressive, and sometimes it's shockingly good. You can even ask your favorite AI to evaluate an ad for you, and it'll generate a thoughtful response. But ask it again, and you'll get a slightly different answer. That flexibility is ideal for conversation and for brainstorming. It's not good for standardized analysis. Generative AI does not automatically know how to evaluate an ad. It won't provide consistent answers. It's not designed to. What we do is very different. We engineered this. We built a structured prompt architecture, refined over many, many iterations, that instructs our AI, Meadow, exactly what to do. First, she detects the presence, absence, and prominence of the 150 content elements. She follows a very strict set of rules. Every time, the same way, with zero wobble. When Meadow identifies a creative element, it's not an opinion. It's a disciplined application of a very strictly defined criteria. And it's built on our historical coding standards. This is the piece that most people miss. If the model training teaches a system what matters, instructional prompt engineering teaches it how to behave. Prompt architecture is not just asking ChatGPT something. It is a disciplined design of a structured instructional set. Define exactly what to detect, specify how to determine presence versus absence, clarify how to assess prominence, enforce standardized definitions, set guardrails to constrain any interpretation, and eliminate any variability. It's layered, it's iterative, and it requires testing, and it requires failure, and it requires refinement over time. We're not looking for a clever answer from a chat GPT model. We're building a repeatable analytical process. Training teaches the system what matters. Prompt architecture ensures that those things are consistently and objectively applied. How Creative Gauge works. Simply upload your creative, TV, digital, print, radio, ad sets, animatics, almost whatever you have. Upload one or many at a time. Hit process. And Meadow goes to work, analyzing those 150 creative content elements, applying the modeling, and within minutes, produces results and recommendations. That speed allows creative evaluation to become part of the normal development workflow. The key idea here is that we're applying a structured research framework to creative evaluation, but doing it at speed and scale that traditional research simply can't match. The output of the system is a creative effectiveness score. The CES score is a roll-up measure that captures the performance across the four key dimensions we discussed earlier: brand messaging, emotional connection, brand linkage, and advertising structure. And below what you see here on the screen, you'll get a full description of the creative and the full analysis of the strengths, weaknesses, and opportunities for improvement across those four key dimensions. Let's talk about Super Bowl advertising. Not because it's timely, the Super Bowl was a month ago already, but because Super Bowl advertising provides an interesting example. Excuse me. It provides an interesting example and demonstrates an originality and effectiveness disconnect. First, many people think Super Bowl advertising is highly effective. It's generally entertaining, gets a lot of attention and conversation, but while entertaining, for the most part, It's not effective. And because of these glaring disconnects, Super Bowl advertising is also a good example to highlight the capabilities of our creative gauge system. Super Bowl ads, while not scoring as effective ads, do generally score extremely high on emotional connection. They're entertaining, they're humorous, often celebrity driven, and memorable. All elements that our AI is extremely adept at identifying. And while they score high on emotional elements, oftentimes you can't remember who the ad was for. So they score poorly on brand linkage and advertising structure dimensions. And because they focus so heavily on entertainment, they generally score very poorly on brand messaging dimensions, which encompass the rational aspects of the value proposition, including whether it successfully differentiates the brand's offering from competition. In other words, they're excellent entertainment, but not always strong selling messages. Creative Gauge captures that distinction. Meadow recognizes emotional strength, but she also evaluates whether the ad communicates a compelling brand differentiating message or value proposition. Creative Gauge can be used throughout the creative development cycle. It can be used early as a first step in pre-testing new creative. It can be used as a triage step in your creative development process to identify the strongest creative and to send weaker creative on for more in-depth evaluation or further development, or to iteratively learn and improve. Use it to close gaps in your creative testing process by testing ads you wouldn't normally test because of cost or timing constraints, and test digital that wouldn't typically even be considered for testing. It can be used globally in almost any language. Use it to test competitive advertising to see how you stack up against the competition. Empower creative partners to produce more effective advertising consistently across media and with speed. And you can use it when low incidence, hard to reach, expensive samples preclude you from research. This brings us back to where we started. Creativity is celebrated, but effectiveness is demanded. The opportunity today is to measure creative effectiveness in ways that connect directly to business performance. And what happens when creative improves? Consumer response improves. Media becomes more effective. Market share grows, and financial performance improves. So improving creative effectiveness is not just about better advertising, it's about improving the productivity of marketing investments. And I'd be happy to take any questions you have.
Well, fantastic, Art. We have some already in the Q&A, and I will remind all of our participants, please, if you want to ask your questions directly, you can raise your hand, or you can enter them into the Q&A via the Q&A button. So the first question we have, Art, is direct marketers have long known that success is one-third media and two-third message. Your four-time importance of creative versus media observation reduces media's contribution to one-fifth of success. Is this attributable to your observation looking at more long-term, brand-focused metrics versus direct responses, short-term performance metrics?
It's a combination, and it goes back to a long-standing study that was conducted by ComScore and ARS prior to MSW's purchase of ARS. We can share that data with you.
Fantastic. And I will say on that one, having I actually participated in some of that research, that in fact it was sales effectiveness on a quarterly basis is what that particular metric was, but it also looked at 2 years as well. So it's not necessarily the time duration is not necessarily it. Um, the Another question, the creative elements that drive any effectiveness metric likely change over time and across generations of consumers. How does your AI predictive model factor in these possible shifts and wastes across time?
We constantly watch that and we update. The creative elements have changed over time as advertising has changed, as the world has changed. Um, this goes back to research that was started in the mid 70s. So what was started back then and what we're doing now, while conceptually based on the same idea, look very differently.
Another question, this from John Gasky of the University of Notre Dame. Great show art. Have you noticed the removal of MASB initials from the MASB logo? How would you like to test the effectiveness of that tactic? So he's saying, in other words, he's saying, would you be willing to look at some of the things that MASB do and provide feedback on that?
Sure, we could test that message. We could run it through Creative Gauge.
Excellent. Another question, can you apply your target audience to the testing? I'm sure the database of ads includes a variety of Gen Pop and a multitude of very specific targets.
Yeah, so the creative content elements are based on universal modeling across all our data sets. What does vary is the norms that we establish. So when you set up a
Hmm.
project in Creative Gauge, you tell us what category it's for. You tell us some information about the ad. We apply the proper norms, and the norms are established based on category, but also channel. So TV norms differ from digital norms, differ from print norms, etc. Um, and what does vary is the norms. So it's not the model itself, but the norms that vary and capture that.
Excellent. Another question is, how do creative agencies receive the results from AI creative testing? Positive, negative, neutral, what has been your experience?
I think creative agencies really like the feedback that it provides. They like the speed that they get things at. It's very easy to use. The dashboard itself is very intuitive. And though while it's set up as a DIY system, there are lots of clients who we actually just do it for them. They send us the ads and we output the results. We can output results in PowerPoint or PDF or whatever they like. Or we set up the tests and just tell them it's ready and they can go on the dashboard and look at it themselves. So it really depends. It is fully DIY, but as you can imagine, with a lot of our clients that use some of our other copy testing tools, some of the more full blown, full up copy testing that provides all the diagnostics and the survey data. Clients use both methodologies so that if they're accustomed to having a lot of account service, then a lot of times we just do it for them.
All right, I'd like to ask a follow-up based on that because some of the feedback that we've had on AI-based systems is that they tend to be more of a black box. They tend to be like they will give you a result of that of some on some scale or this is good or bad, however it gets outputted, but they don't tend to give you details that the agencies can grasp onto to understand that. Could you explain a little bit more about what is delivered as far as an overall view of the ad versus being able to drill down and isolate the why?
Yeah, absolutely. So while you do get the main CES score, the roll-up measure, you get scores for each of the key dimensions as well. So you can see on the first level, you can see how each of the dimensions contribute to the overall score. But then also importantly, you also get the analysis. So one of the first things that Meadow does is she writes a description of the ad of whatever she's seeing, whatever you've uploaded. That's the first thing that she does. So she writes that description of the ad. And then, because she knows the scores and the contributions of all the different 150 elements to each to the score overall, she writes an analysis on the dimensions. And so she's providing strengths, weaknesses, and opportunities for improvement across those dimensions. And she's actually playing back um, key elements, creative elements within each one of those dimensions, and she's making recommendations on hey, you need to improve this. You need to have the ad or the brand mentioned earlier up front, or have a stronger close, or your brand differentiating message. You're lacking a brand differentiating message, perhaps. So she's making very specific recommendations on how to improve the creative.
Yeah, I'd like a follow-up on that particular point of the application of metal at in the development stage. Um, where do you have a particular recommendation of how it should be used at various stages, or have you seen that clients have gravitated towards earlier or later stages? So, for example, you mentioned ASEPs or animatics, those type of early processes. Then you have roughs. Then you have, more finished copy. And if people are using the earlier one, and my second part of this is, if people are using it earlier in the process, do they also do it later to ensure that the fidelity remained from the early copy to the finished advertising? How is that from a
Yeah.
process basis handled?
Yeah. Well, ideally, we offer products that serve a variety of different needs. So ideally, I mean, one of the best ways I think that we'd like to see our clients use it up front for early stage creative work. Use it to screen ad sets. Use it to find out what has potential for further development. Then go into your development. Feed that information back to your creative team, let them work with that, let them develop your campaign. And then, ideally do full up copy testing, survey based research, lots of diagnostics, lots of learning that comes out of that. Um, really work on your ad, hone it. And then you can come back and use Creative Gauge as a go, no go, red flag situation. Make sure you're still on track, and then launch. And then, it allows you to launch with confidence.
Okay,
But
great.
that being said, we have clients who, you know, pick and choose. Use it early, use it late, use it for specific purposes. So it really varies.
Yeah, and I'd like to cue on another point. You mentioned Super Bowl ads, and I know MSW has historically reviewed Super Bowl ads during the year. Did you have any findings coming out of this year that were less about the system, but more about just generally how this year has this past Super Bowl has done advertising wise?
Yeah, surprisingly, this year they were a little bit better than last year overall. Last year's were pretty bad, and we wrote a blog on it last year. But I mean, the overall theme is that Super Bowl advertising is very atypical. It's not really designed to sell products, so you can't really fault them for that. It's all about entertainment. It's all about celebrity-driven humor, attention grabbing, things like that. They really lack product messaging, much less any kind of product differentiation. So they really don't score well. But I like using it as an example, especially of our Creative Gauge tool, because Creative Gauge is able to identify all those emotional elements. So when you look at the screen and you see all the rankings of 10 or 15 or however many Super Bowl ads you have, the needle for emotional connection, they're all pinned to the right. They're all green, while all the other needles fall off. So I just think it's a great example of the capabilities of the AI system and of Meadow. And it goes back to when we first started training Meadow. Like I said, she writes a description of the ad. And when we went into this AI process, this journey that we're on, we thought the AI was going to be challenged on certain things, and we thought it would be really good at other things. And some of the things that we thought it would be challenged on were things like emotional connection.
Mhm.
And right out of the gate, we were able to see that Meadow was picking up on things like attempts at humor and facial expressions and emotional elements of the ad because she was seeing it in the characters. So we, leaned into that and really pushed her capabilities in that direction. And now she's extraordinarily good at it. I mean, she's amazing. Um, so, the things that we thought she was going to be challenged on, she ended up being very good at. The things we thought she was going to be good at, counting. AI, the models, they're generally not good at counting. That required a lot of training. So whether the brand is shown in the first 3 seconds and whether it's shown in the last 3 to 5 seconds, opening and closing scenes, like counting those elements, how many times the brand is shown. If there's a product demonstration, how long is the product demonstration? How many seconds? So those kind of counting elements required a lot of training and a lot of learning, both learning on our part and learning on Meadow's part. But now she's, extraordinarily consistent, just really capable.
Yeah, I really find that fascinating because traditionally human coding, the one of the toughest things has been on those structure elements, and especially with the timing because you're sitting there with stopwatches or computerized applications. I know MSW has invested a lot in on human coding side over the years as well to make that e efficient and effective and consistent.
Absolutely.
And so it's very interesting to see that you're taking all of that knowledge which was built up on that and then converting it over into a way that AI can actually do it.
Yeah. Well, all that human coding over the years. I mean, that was the foundation for this. We were doing all that human coding, and then we said, you know what? Maybe AI can help us do this. And when you have human coders sit down and code a 30-second ad on 150 content elements, you can only imagine how long that takes.
Right.
They have to watch the ad, they have to rewind it, they have to watch it again. I mean, it's an enormously time-consuming process. So, the AI, while that provided the foundation, all every one of those human coders had a set of instructions and a code book and detailed instructions on how to code each one of those elements, what to look for, timing, everything like you just said, Frank. So that human code book, you know, pro- provided the foundation for the AI training, but obviously we had to blow that out tremendously, and you know, get it to really work.
Great. We have another question here. They would like to know if you can Meadow pre-test creator influencer content for boosting in paid social media environments.
Yes, absolutely. Influencer marketing is something that's gotten attention, and Meadow can do that as well.
And I have one last question, and that has to do with the categories. As you know, Art, I've always been fascinated with the entertainment space and movie trailer business, and spent a lot of time on that on the trailer side. And so I'm very curious on long content as opposed to short content. Has Meadow seen the similar type of things that we have done previously through humans on when you're looking at things which are like 3 minutes long versus 10 to 15 seconds long? And is there anything where in particular where Meadow can help on either of those ends? So like in the very short ads, in the longer trailer type content.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. I mean, the longer your ad, the more opportunity you have to present a lot of information. So, in a 10-second ad or a 6-second pre-roll or, something very small, you don't have a lot of opportunity. So you got to really make that time work for you. Longer ads, you have a lot more opportunity to talk about brand differentiation, present a compelling value proposition, present your case. So yeah, the biggest difference between those things is that the norms vary. Like I said, norms
Hmm.
for different channels, TV versus print, 30-second versus 60-second, those norms change.
Oh, okay, very interesting. Yeah, I didn't think about that on the normative side to actually um when you're making those comparisons, and on the upside that it's very important to do one on a time-based norm. Oh, that's very provocative. Um, well, Art, do you have any, I have no other questions here on the list. Do you have any last comments that you would like to share, or experiences that you would like to share?
Um, no, I think we pretty covered it pretty much. If anybody's interested, reach out, contact me. Be happy to give you a demo of the system, walk you through the platform. Just reach out.
All right. Well, thank you very much, Art. It's been a pleasure to have you on doing this webinar and on this fascinating use of AI.
Thanks for having me, Frank.